Once again, I'm pleased to welcome you to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowning with Campbellsville University, and today we're continuing our series of interviews with candidates for governor in the May 21st primary here in Kentucky. Today we're very pleased to be interviewing former state auditor Adam Edelen, candidate in the Democratic primary for Kentucky governor. Adam, welcome back.
Great to be back,
John. You don't mind my calling you Adam?
Not at all, please.
Tell us just a little bit about yourself. You're pretty well known in Campbellsville, but just for those who might not know you.
For those who haven't yet gotten the opportunity to influence, my name is Adam Edelen. I'm the former state auditor in Kentucky, and I've got extensive experience in both the public and the private sector. But more important than that is my origin story. I'm from Meade County, Kentucky. I was born there, and when my parents brought me home from the hospital, it was to a single-wide trailer where my dad built grain bins for a living and my mother was 16. And the reason I'm so passionate about opportunity for people is that I benefited from opportunities that were given to me and earned for me by my parents. And I just passionately believe we need a governor who believes that state government ought to be in the opportunity business, that we ought to be about ensuring that everyone gets the opportunity to realize their version of the American dream in the part of Kentucky they call home.
Now, why did you choose to run for governor? You were back in private business and from all reports doing rather well.
Doing well, but I am deadly concerned that the state is moving aggressively and arrogantly in the opposite direction of history. You know, in my business career, I'm a renewable energy developer. I'm working with expansion stage companies as they try to grow in this state. And what I'm saying is we have a political leadership set in both parties that is pursuing an economy that just doesn't exist anymore. John, we can and should expect more for our people than low-skill, low-wage jobs. But to build the economy of the future, we've got to do things like bring high-quality broadband and the internet to every community in Kentucky, something we're not doing. And you can't be relevant to the opportunities of the digital age unless you've got the internet going to people's houses. We're not embracing renewable energy as part of our overall energy portfolio. We're underfunding education, and we're making it more difficult to get health care. Those 4 or 5 things conspire to make it impossible to build a 21st century modern economy in this state. And I felt drawn back into politics because I think I have the skill set at this particular time and place to be the governor our state needs to build a modern Kentucky.
You are touching on this, obviously. You're one of 4 candidates in the Democratic primary. Why do you think you're the best choice for Democratic voters?
I think I have the clearest view of how to build a modern Kentucky in which all of our people can enjoy prosperity. I'm also, to beat Matt Bevin in the fall is going to require a candidate who can go toe-to-toe with the governor on job creation and who has a record of fighting corruption. And I'm the only Democrat who is creating jobs. I'm the only Democrat who has had a record as the taxpayer watchdog, sending crooked politicians of both parties to prison for their misdeeds in office. And I think that is a record that I have that works with a vision I have for the future that I think makes me the most compelling candidate, not just on the Democratic side, but on the ballot this year entirely.
In terms of your public service, Adam, what would you point to for the voters as your that would point out that you're the most independent candidate in this race and not bound by partisan politics?
Well, I've got 2 or 3 examples, but I think maybe the best is the work that I did with Republican Commissioner of Agriculture Jamie Comer, who's now a Republican member of Congress, including this area, where we worked together to hold Richie Farber accountable for his misdeeds in office. And at a time and a place when I was certainly being advised politically against working with Jamie Comer, and I know Jamie Comer was getting similar heat about working with me, the fact that both of us sort of held hands and did the right thing to very important consequence in Kentucky. What we demonstrated was that regardless if you're incredibly powerful or popular or your banner hangs in Rupp Arena, that if you committed crimes in office that we would hold you accountable. And I think I have a demonstrated record of working with all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds to get things done. And from the work I did on special taxing districts, to the work I did uncovering the rape kit crisis, to the work I did bringing attention to corruption and malfeasance in our public school systems, I've got a demonstrated record of doing the right thing and working with members of either party to get that done. You know, I just fundamentally believe, maybe this comes from being a farmer's kid, maybe this comes from having so much experience in business, but I just believe that we can do big, important things provided we embrace the notion that we don't have to agree on everything to work together on something. And I've always employed that approach, and I think I've had a lot of luck in getting big, important things done because of it.
Now tell us about your running mate.
So my running mate is Gil Holland, and Gil is not a politician. Gil is a noted community builder and real estate developer in Louisville. And so one of the things I knew that I wanted my lieutenant governor to focus on is helping smaller communities revitalize their urban cores, their main street corridors. Because we now know that economic development isn't so much about being the cheapest place to do business as it is about being a great place to live. And so Gil's record of creating New Lou, which is essentially Louisville's Brooklyn, it's diverse and dynamic and is extraordinary. And the work he's doing in an older community like Portland to revitalize that community makes him not only the best qualified person in Kentucky to lead this effort, but probably the best qualified in America. Because what I want every Kentucky community to at least have a shot at enjoying is the prosperity that we've got here, right here in Campbellsville, where you have one of the most dynamic universities in the United States, in my view, focused on impacting its local community and beyond. The fact that your downtown here is beautiful and vibrant. This community is incredibly attractive to not just the people that we want to keep here, but people we want to recruit here. And I want those sort of Campbellsville blessings for other places around the state. And Gil Holland will lead that effort as Lieutenant Governor, and I think
So he would concentrate on economic development,
yes,
particularly
quality of life,
issues.
And so making sure that we can expand sidewalks and that the Wi-Fi is available and that we can help local communities and local developers use the best practices from all over the country to bring prosperity and opportunity and a heightened quality of life to their local community means we can have extraordinary impact. And he'll lead that effort, and I think he'll do a terrific job.
This may sound like an odd question. You may not get it anywhere else, but it's been my observation since Kentucky adopted the amendment that led to a governor and lieutenant governor running together, it's not been very successful.
It's
in
not.
The context of after a little while, the governor and the lieutenant governor don't get along very well.
Well, John, is evidenced by the current governor and lieutenant governor, where the governor forced his lieutenant governor off the ticket in favor of someone else. It's because politicians usually slate, and those slatings are marriages of convenience.
So do you think you and Mr. Holland are compatible over the long run?
Gil and I have been friends for 12 years,
okay,
and our friendship has never been political. It's been about mutual support in terms of getting things done. And I think a big part of the problem we've had in Kentucky is that politicians look for people who help them politically. Certainly, I think Gil is a political asset, but more important, he's a human asset. And we've been friends and supported each other for 12 years, and I'm excited about what he'll do here in Kentucky.
Another thing I hear you talking about in the media and on your advertising, you're not accepting political action committee contributions?
Not a dime of corporate PAC money, because if we're going to fix Frankfort, you have to change our broken politics. And our politics are broken because of the way campaigns have been financed in the past, where special interests come in and buy and sell politicians. And then when they get into office, they're locked into that frame of thought because that's where their funders come from. And as my minister back in Lexington says, if you can spend 5 minutes with your checking account, he can tell you what your true values are. What I want the people of Kentucky to know is that when I'm their governor, I'll only work for them. I won't have been bought and sold by the special interest, and that's why we're the only campaign not taking a dime of corporate PAC money this cycle.
Can you raise the money sufficient, absent that money?
And we have, and we're getting a lot of support, and it's statewide, and we're turning a lot of people on to a campaign based on ideas and powered by people. You know, John, I'm traveling all over Kentucky, more than 2,000 miles a week. I was here for a town hall not long ago, as you remember, on a Saturday. We're getting great crowds turning out because I speak for a little bit and then I answer every question until there aren't any anymore. And what's remarkable is not only the crowds we're generating in person, but oftentimes we're drawing between 2,500 and 3,500 people watching on Facebook Live because we live stream all of these. And so money isn't the only metric of engagement. The number of people showing up at our events, that when we started this campaign rather late, we were an afterthought in terms of social media engagement, and now we've got more Facebook followers than either of our opponents. And we've got more Twitter followers than both of them put together.
What do you consider to be the most challenging issue confronting the Commonwealth during the next 4 years? And specifically, what policy proposals would you as governor put on the table with the legislature and your team to address those problems?
No doubt the biggest issue we have in Kentucky is that we have a tax system that at the same time it underprovides for our Treasury, it also retards business development. And so that is a double negative, which is not a positive for the state of Kentucky. So the next governor is going to have to work with members of both parties to find out how we build a system of taxation that both meets the needs of our schools and our pension systems and our infrastructure systems, while also being more conducive to growing the economy. And there are examples for how we do that around the country, but it's going to take a governor that leads from the front, that is willing to take a political hit, and that actively engages the leadership of the other party. Because the fact of the matter is that I'm going all over Kentucky, and in Republican and Democratic counties alike, I'm talking to people who 10 years ago knew that they had the best road system in the country, who now know it's among the worst. I'm talking to people who are seeing arts and band programs cut back in their schools. I'm seeing families in Republican communities as well as Democratic communities who are concerned about meeting our pension obligation. There is a growing concern and consensus in Kentucky that we can't make investments in the future if we're trying to run this thing on the cheap. And so making sure that we have a governor who's willing to lead from the front, engage the other party, and willing to make specific proposals based on that collaboration, I think is key to Kentucky getting in a place to make the investments so we can prosper in a new digital age.
Would that be more likely more emphasis on consumption taxes, more emphasis on a more progressive income tax, combination thereof?
I think it could be a combination thereof. And I think anybody who's going to tell you the truth knows that there's going to have to be give and take if we're going to strike a grand bargain in Kentucky. But I think freeing up local communities to make increasingly larger decisions about their own finances is incredibly important. I think one of the areas where I would agree, I think philosophically with a number of Republicans, is that government that is closest to the people governs best. I think that's a bedrock core for an awful lot of conservatives and libertarians. But in that vein, shouldn't we free up local communities to have more autonomy in determining their fiscal policy? I think we should, because in some of the most conservative places around this country, Oklahoma City comes to mind, where they have a local option sales tax that is only permissible upon the electorate agreeing to do that. They have made tremendous investments in infrastructure and education, and as a result may be the hottest mid-sized city in America. I think understanding that the more power we get out of Frankfort and disperse into local communities, the better Kentucky's going to do.
Do you think you can bring a Republican legislature along on that kind of issue?
I do.
Letting local option on taxes, and that will the Club for Growth and other groups like that
I don't know.
Beat you over the head, or beat the legislature over the head?
Well, they may or may not. They have very little influence on me because I'm not taking any of their corporate PAC money to get elected. But I think we're going to have to, we have seen in Kentucky a really perverse form of tax reform, John. The last legislative session where we shifted the tax burden onto the 95% of taxpayers, where we got into a position where we're quite literally taxing charities and nonprofits, I think is a key element of how broken this tax system is. And I think there is a consensus that we need to fix it. But I will say this, John, revenue, particularly new investment, has got to be connected to specific policies, because I think the days of asking the people of Frankfort to pay more into what is the black hole of Frankfort's, black hole of Calcutta budget process won't work. But I think if you went to the people of Kentucky and said, listen, we need to do this to make sure that broadband gets to every home. By the way, taking the internet to every part of the plowed ground or every holler or every bit of the inner city is great investment because it pays itself off. I mean, we've got to understand that there are long-term investments that have to be made here that we're simply not getting done. And when we fail to get done, we fail to prepare our people for the future.
Is the current effort, the Kentucky broadband effort, is it adequate? Is it riddled with problems as reported in the media and some of the legislative oversight
Yes, we
concerns?
had our last Democrat administration that created it failed to lead from the front on it, and then I think we've had in the Bevin administration a group who fundamentally didn't believe in it, and so the result is what we have isn't working. And so I think we all have to agree to the premise that bringing broadband to every Kentuckian is as critical a infrastructure challenge as it was when FDR electrified the South through the Rural Electrification Authority and absolutely changed the destiny of our region. It's just as important as when a Republican president in the form of Eisenhower understood that to open up middle America to prosperity, we had to have an interstate transportation and highway system. This is the infrastructure challenge of our time. And when we live in a state, and we do, and you and I are both products of rural Kentucky, where the McDonald's between 4 and 6 in the evening is chock full with people, not just buying hamburgers and milkshakes, but because McDonald's has become the most reliable provider of Wi-Fi in rural Kentucky, there may not be a better example of how our government, in a bipartisan manner, has failed to prepare our people to prosper in the future.
The current effort seems to be riddled with lots of questions and unanswered questions.
There's no question.
And
so,
lots of money being spent, lots of liability created.
And you have to lead from the front.
Not there.
This is not something a governor can staff out. And the corollary to that is that we are largely credited with being the state that got the Medicaid expansion most right. And it was because we had governor and a leadership team that were leading from the front and were intimately involved. This is the broadband is the central infrastructure challenge of our time. And as governor, I will be intimately involved with its successful deployment. I will bring together both the private sector, who is skilled to do a lot of this work, and nonprofit and governmental players to help bring the infrastructure to where it's less profitable to bring. But I'm going to be intimately involved with this. It's something I'll lead from the front, and I have a reputation for being a guy who's hands-on. I'll be very hands-on in this area.
Across the political spectrum, concern about the opioid crisis, the ravages of cartels bringing in amphetamine, trafficking, and so on. What would you as governor propose to do about the crisis that we face?
And it is a crisis, and Frankfort politicians beating their chests about who they've sued and who they've taken on doesn't change the fact that we're losing an entire generation to the opioid battle. And I think there are two things that we have to do. The first is understand that this is a public health emergency as much as it's a law enforcement emergency. John, we don't have sufficient inpatient treatment facilities available to addicts. And I don't know how in a state where so many of us value our faith, we can claim to be meeting our obligation as Christians when we haven't built a sustainable network of religious providers and nonprofits and even for-profit institutions to make sure that we have sufficient infrastructure to make sure that there's treatment for people who want to be treated for their addiction. Because to beat it, it has to be all hands on deck. There's a role for the faith community, there's a role for the profit community, and everybody in between. But this is a crisis that requires everybody's involvement. I haven't seen that sort of coordination, and it's still, we have a pittance of the number of beds that we need for addicts. The second is that we have to shut down the addiction factory. And I just passionately believe, and haven't always believed this, for a guy like me to get comfortable with marijuana as medicine took a lot of listening and a lot of reflection and a lot of prayer. But it seems to me that we have to offer medical marijuana as an alternative to these heroin-based opioids that such a large percentage of our population become addicted to immediately. And I tell you, a very personal story in my evolution on this issue is that my friend Rex Chapman, UK basketball great, dealt with a very public addiction that lasted 15 years, and it started not from having his knee replaced or a rod put in his leg or reconstruction of his ankle, all of which he got through with nothing more than ibuprofen. It's that after his playing career, he had to have his appendix removed, and they put him on Oxycontin, and on the third day he was addicted, and it took him 15 years to beat that addiction. He's made it clear to me in a convincing way that to beat this, you have to have treatment, high-quality treatment for addicts, and you have to offer medical marijuana as an alternative.
Long-term treatment, too, not just short-term.
And John, we have to understand that these opiates, I mean, it's essentially a heroin derivative, are so powerful that it often takes a lifetime for people to beat their addiction. I mean, it took Rex 15 years and multiple tries, and we've got to understand that as a society, to me, it makes more sense to lift people up and support them when they inevitably fall than it does to lock them up.
Kentucky has major infrastructure needs. You've alluded to that. We once had a great transportation system. We now have bridges that are crumbling, roads that are full of potholes. You've heard me speak of the need for the Heartland Parkway. I would be remiss if I did not mention it in this interview.
And you know I'm for it, John.
I'm glad
I've
you're.
always been
I'm
for
glad
it.
you're still
Yes,
for it,
sir.
Adam.
Well, I'm a Meade County product.
There you
man.
go.
This is really important to opening up opportunity in a part of Kentucky where people know how to say Edelen.
That's correct. We do know how to, and we know how to spell it.
That's
as well.
exactly right.
And you drove in from Louisville on
That's
210.
right. That's right.
And we need 210 being upgraded.
We do, and in a big portion of that road is 2-lane. And when we're seeing pockets of prosperity emerge where we're doing it the right way, like what's happening in Taylor County is pretty remarkable, considering that by transportation it's still pretty isolated from the more urban parts of the state. And so being smart about transportation is really important, making sure that the investments go to where they need to go. And we also have to bring a renewed focus to maintenance, John. I mean, Kentuckians know we've got the most aggressive freeze-thaw cycle in the United States, and it's just been really rough on our roads. And as a state that as recently as 10 years ago had some of the best rural and secondary roads in the state, I can tell you from traveling a couple thousand miles a week, they have really regressed. And that's to the detriment of a state that is worked so hard to build ourselves as a center of the logistics economy.
Right. We have the federal highway funding, we have state highway funding, gasoline tax. Do we need more funding?
Well, certainly
additional sources of funding?
We do, all of the above. And we've got to understand that our road fund has been primarily financed through the gas tax, right? Well, John, you and I both know that it's an inevitability that an increasing percentage of our vehicles are going to be electrically powered. I mean, by 2023, every single automotive manufacturer, major automotive manufacturer in the world, including all of them that operate in Kentucky, are going to produce an electric motor that costs the same as the internal combustion engine. This is a market force. So what happens when an increasing share of our people are powering their house, powering their vehicles through an electric hookup at their house rather than at the gas station? So we've got to have leadership that has more than a passing sort of knowledge that things are changing. I know how things are changing in a concrete way, and we better re-examine how we finance road construction and maintenance in this state, because our formula is becoming more and more outdated every day.
What will you do as governor specifically to help advance rural economic development? Not at the expense of the Golden Triangle.
Because it's not at the expense.
But how can we help rural Kentucky, this part of Kentucky, Western Kentucky, your home area, Eastern Kentucky? How can we help rural Kentucky catch up?
So John, two things, and I don't mean to sound like a brokered record here, but we have got to get the digital infrastructure everywhere. Communities are not relevant to the 21st century economy unless you have connectivity, and too few places have connectivity. The second is that we've got to embrace the renewable energy revolution. And this is all of the Fortune 500 companies, including the fossil fuel companies, have sustainability goals. They're all under board mandates to have at least portions of their portfolio produced renewably. And companies like Toyota have the goal by 2050 of being completely renewably powered, including their vendors. I mean, this is a huge technological and cultural and economic shift. And so for Kentucky to create the jobs of the future, we've got to embrace the power of the future. And this is something I know more than a little about. I've worked for the last 3 years on a massive solar project, which will be the largest in Kentucky by a factor of 10, the largest in this part of the United States, and the first ever in Appalachia. We're on a mountaintop removal site in East Kentucky. We're going to take about 700 acres of mountaintop removal site. We're going to $130 million capital investment, not a dime of that out of the taxpayer's pocket. We'll produce 100 megawatts of renewable energy, and we're going to put up about 600,000 solar panels, which will be put there by out-of-work coal miners. This is what economic development looks like in the future. It's also what leadership looks like in the future, because for all those folks who whine that we can't get Republicans to work with Democrats, or we can't get Democrats to work with Republicans, I can assure you that divide is far more narrow than getting Eastern Kentucky coal operators to work with French renewable energy engineers. But I did it, and I held them together, and this is going to be a truly historic project. that will have real impact on the future of the state, and it's something that we can replicate everywhere. Solar works everywhere in Kentucky. And these are the jobs of the future, and we can embrace, not only does it diversify our economy, it provides a path for helping employees who just want to be relevant to the 21st century to develop those skill sets. And what I love about a renewable energy job is by its very definition, it cannot be exported to China or Mexico.
We're down to about a minute, about out of time. Two areas we've not touched on, they're interrelated to some extent, education and the pensions.
Yes. And
Comments
so,
on that?
and so here's my frustration with the education conversation in Kentucky, is it has been completely dominated by pensions. And of course we need to keep our pension commitment to our teachers, but we have to understand it's not the best we can do, it's the least we can do. And if you want to advance education, we need to be talking about how we shrink class size, because teacher to student ratios are spiking again, and everybody with a brain in their head knows the kids learn better when there are fewer of them in the classroom. We need to be talking about how to integrate technology more fully into curriculum, because children process information differently than did you or I when we were in school. And if you don't believe me, give a 3-year-old an iPhone, right?
Absolutely.
We need to be talking about how we make the 11th and 12th grades of high school better transitions into whatever it is that comes next, be it a community and technical education, be it a university education, be it a liberal arts education. We're not doing any of those things. And so not only are we have to fund the pensions, we have to keep our word, but we also have to be more ambitious in how we view the conversation about education, because keeping the pension promise will help us keep a share of what we already have, but it doesn't make it easier to recruit the best and brightest into the profession. And it doesn't represent an agenda of real education reform, and that's what Kentucky's got to do to get where it ought to be.
Adam, we're out of time.
Thanks, John.
We wish you the very best.
Appreciate it.
Godspeed out on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
This is John Chowning with Adam Edelen, Democratic candidate for governor, subject to the May 21st primary. We thank him for his time today, and thank you, our audience, for being with us. And we encourage you to go and vote on May 21st and make informed choices in both the Democratic and Republican primaries. Thank you, and God bless.